What's going on, Lions fans? Welcome to the Pride of Detroit YouTube channel. My name is Miko, joined once again by my guy Morgan Cannon, and this is your go-to place for all things Lions related. That includes news, updates, analysis, and so much more. Today, we are going to be jumping back a week, Morgan, because you got the opportunity to actually attend Lions OTAs last week. I'm a little jealous, but it's all good. We both are coming off of very, very busy weekends. First of all, congratulations, my guy, on tying the knot. Very, very happy for you. But a lot of good stuff to talk about, right?
Yeah, thank you, man. Yeah, we are coming off a busy weekend. Had our little ceremony and baby shower. So I'm about to go to sleep at 8 o'clock tonight. But yeah, and Thursday, like as my family was coming in town, so Eric had the kids. They were still in school, still had all their activities. Jeremy was on vacation, so I was in the building in Allen Park for the last OTA number 6, and it ended up being, if y'all remember the end of the week, those of y'all that are local to the Metro Detroit area, it was rainy and like crappy that day.
Mm-hmm.
Dan Campbell ended up moving things inside and changing probably the trajectory of that practice a little bit. Although I don't think they were going to ever ratchet up the intensity by any means. But yeah, we'll get to that. And but overall, really cool experience. I'd covered camps and stuff like that for POD, but I had never covered an OTA or anything at Allen Park, so that was pretty dope.
Yeah, no, I don't think they could have asked for a better person to do it, because I know me personally, I would have just been like just kind of enamored with everything going on, like trying to put down detailed notes on what is happening and who's playing where and who's lining up where. I definitely took the time to check out your article, which I highly recommend all of you do as well, because maybe there's some things that we don't get to talk about here in this video that Morgan outlined in his article over there on the Pride of Detroit website. But like we said, there are a couple things that stood out from this OTA practice, even though it wasn't the most intense practice. Like you said, it's an OTA, it's not training camp, so completely different vibe in that context, but still a number of good things to take away from. One of those things being, it's obviously these OTA practices where the media gets that availability. It is their opportunity to talk to Dan, and this was their first chance to talk to Dan since Frank retired, and so obviously getting some feedback from him on that news. But before we jump into that, because obviously we spent a good amount of time talking about Frank's retirement, one of the other things that both Dan and Amon-Ra St. Brown talked about, because he was also in the building for OTAs, is just how this offense is going to look differently. And Morgan, that is something that we've speculated about in terms of, the Lions losing Ben Johnson to the Chicago Bears, bringing in John Morton. What kind of changes can we expect? And for the most part, they've been fairly quiet in terms of saying like, hey, it's not going to change a whole lot. We're not going to be trying to completely reinvent the wheel. But we got a little more out of Dan this week, or last week, I should say, in regards to isolating certain players, right?
Yeah, and I like that they use that verbiage. And we've heard John Morton talk, we've heard Dan Campbell talk, because we know he's going to have his hands in the offensive pot, so to speak. And it's just been good to hear them say they're going to continue doing, because if I subscribe to the old adage, like, if it ain't broke, don't fix it, man. So the offense, as we know it here in Detroit, is not broken. But it was cool to hear Dan talk about, so they talked about this when he came out for the press conference before practice. Cool to hear him just completely dismiss the crazy stuff about the Frank Ragnow contract situation, man. It didn't have anything to do with that, and he shut that down pretty emphatically, in my opinion. But then, he got to talking about the offense, and I thought this quote was really telling. So we've tweaked a few things here and there, how he sees it, how he wants things to run, how he wants to isolate certain players. So that's what Campbell said of Morton's vision. A lot of the focal points were receiver Jameson Williams, running back Jahmyr Gibbs, tight end Sam Laporta, among others. I thought we really honed in on their versatility and all the things they can do. So that's music to my ears, because you got your first team All-Pro. He's established, man. He's like a 25 point a night scorer in the NBA, in my opinion. Like, Saint's going to get his, because that's the kind of player he is. But if you can really start, treating football a little bit more like basketball, because this offense has so many ways to beat you, I think you can really get the best of people on a week-to-week basis, because there's just so much this offense can throw at you at once. So yeah, that was music to my ears. What about you, Miko?
No, same here. I think it's definitely fuel to the fire for those that are Jameson Williams fans that have been hearing nothing but good things about him this offseason and about, it's one thing to say like, hey, this player looks good. It's another thing, to your point, Morgan, when Dan and both Am and Ra, when they're talking to the media, are coming out and saying like, hey, no, we're going to isolate these guys because they are, so talented, because they do have so many things that they can do so well. And I know for you and I, looking at Jameson Williams, obviously we saw his role expand a lot last year, right? He wasn't just a deep threat. He was starting to get much more involved in the intermediate game. They were starting to get him more involved in terms of end rounds and things like that to really take advantage of his skill set. When I hear, Dan talk about like, hey, John Morton wants to isolate that and he wants to get him even more incorporated into other aspects of the game, that's going to do crazy things, I think, for Jamo's, trajectory in the NFL, because he is more than just a deep threat. He does have so much more capabilities to his game. And so I really am curious to see what that looks like, whether that's him just getting more targets, whether that's him being lining up in different parts of the offense. I think that's going to be huge for him and his development. And then when you flip it over to Jahmyr, I can't even fathom what else they're looking to do with him, because I feel like Jahmyr is truly hitting his stride as of last year. Once David Montgomery went down for those stretch of games, we really saw Ja thrive. And I have a hard time just imagining what else they can possibly do with him going into year 3.
Man, I'm hoping like this is like Jameer's anime. And like when he puts on Zero, it's like his final evolution, like he's on his Sung Jin Woo stuff. Like, and he like, I'm like, oh, you're like a necromancer now, some type stuff
Mm-hmm.
like that. So that's what I'm hoping for Jahmyr, because I thought the same thing. I'm like, well, dang, the man just had, damn near 2,000 yards from scrimmage and he had 20 touchdowns. What else can we really unlock here? But then I got to thinking about it and I was like, well, there's ways. And especially like you said, if they can unlock more of Jamo, man, just because Jamo, as we know, guys, like he stretches defenses like both horizontally and vertically. Like when he catches those crossers and he just erases angles, like he's making world class athletes like safeties and
Mm-hmm.
DBs look slow and dumb, just piecing out on them, high stepping at the 30. Like that's not supposed to happen, but that's the speed Jamo has and what he brings to the table. So yeah, I was excited to hear that, and even Sam, because as everyone, there's a lot of mouths to feed on the offense, as we mentioned. But Sam took a little bit of a backseat last year. It's not any fault of his own. Just
Mm-hmm.
there's only so many plays in the on offense, and there's only so many targets to go around. But I'm hoping he starts like, hey, like I do this too. So like I need my opportunities as well between the hashes and like up the seam, whatever. Like let's get me some targets too, because I think he's a mismatch. 6'3", 250, essentially like a big Y who can really move in space at like the
Mm-hmm.
top of his route. Yeah, Sam's a problem too. So I like it, man. I want John Morton thinking like a basketball coach. Like, how can I isolate my dudes against these guys that have no chance of covering them in space? You know what I'm saying?
I love that you say that. And I think that, because I think when people hear about, again, Ja getting so much hype, when they hear about JMO getting so much hype, we know Saint's going to get his. Like, he's never going to take a backseat in terms of the role that he has on this team. It does kind of raise some questions when you bring up the likes of Sam Laporte and when you bring up the likes of David Montgomery, because it's like you said, there's only so many offensive snaps, there's only so many opportunities. Do you think we see either of those players kind of see their usage get tailored back in this upcoming season, or do you just think the usage is just going to look different when we talk about the likes of Jamo and Ja?
I think it's just going to look like a little different, because I still think Jahmyr is going to obviously outpace Montgomery when it comes to like touches on the season, but I still think they'll probably keep it not not stray too far from 50-50, just because I do think you want Jahmyr super fresh for those games,
Mm-hmm.
hopefully in late January, early February, where you're like, hey, Jahmyr, we're going to give you the ball. You're going to touch the ball 32 times today. How do you feel about that?
Yeah.
Okay, like it could be our last game of the season. Let's ride. You know what I mean? So
Mm-hmm.
that's kind of how I want them to approach it, just because I do want to save our S-rated Hunter for that big game. Hopefully, you know what I'm saying? Knock
Yeah.
on
Yeah.
wood. You guys know how I do if you've been watching this channel for a long time. But yeah, I think Sam's still going to get his, and I still think they're going to incorporate David, because he's a great running back and he's good in pass pro, all that good stuff. But I just think you got to keep everyone balanced so you're not wearing anybody too hard, and have them available hopefully for a deep postseason run. So I wonder though, like if from a passing standpoint, I wonder how close we'll get to like almost 3 even shares though between Jameson, St. Brown, and Laporta, because in my opinion,
Mm.
that's kind of where I'd like it to get. Like I know you can't realistically get to like 33.333 for everybody, but they all kind of demand it, right, Miko? Just because they're all so special in their own ways.
Well, and I think even if you were to look at it that way, the person that would probably get the least amount of targets is probably Jamo, and it's not because he's deserving of the least. It's just I think he's going to do the most with the least. So like
Yeah.
Jamo could theoretically have 10 to 15 targets less than Saint, but still probably outpace Saint in terms of like yardage, right? Like I could see something like that happen. But if you're talking someone like Sam Laporta, I think Sam like got a good amount of opportunities last year, but like we talked about it when it was happening, like he was just off to a slower start. Like things just weren't clicking between him and Jared. I think he probably had a few more drops than we were really accustomed to seeing after his rookie season. But once he got to like that midpoint in the season, he really started to come on. So I think even for him, it's just consistency, right? Like if you can start the season hot, I think Sam will have no problem reaching back to that Pro Bowl season that he had even in his rookie year.
Yeah, and especially as he's good at finding the soft spots in coverage and like identifying where, okay, like I've got some green grass. Let me go ahead and sit down, make this easy for Jared. So if Jameson continuing to develop would be music if I'm Sam Laporta, because you're going to have so much space to work, man. They got to worry about 14, 1, 0. I'm a defensive guy by nature from playing and coaching. So when I think about that stuff, man, preparing for the Lions offense would be terrible. Like I think about that a lot. Like it'd be tough to face like Josh Allen, Lamar, those kind of cats too, because they're so special. But the Lions are really like a 5-headed dragon at this point, man. It's getting pretty diabolical up in here, and I love it. I can't even lie to you.
Yeah,
I'm very excited for it to be early June.
I listen, man, I'm right there with you. Now, unfortunately, there is an aspect of this offense that still does have some question marks, and that's something that Dan had to address as well in this press conference, which is like we talked about. Frank Ragnow retiring is a big blow to this offensive line, and it's going to be really difficult to figure out how they're going to replace an all-pro level talent like him. But Dan did at least offer some confidence, or at least he seems to be very confident in the guys that they have in the building, as he named off a number of guys who he thinks could possibly fill in, not just at the center spot, but just we've talked about this before. The guard spots are also possibly in flux as well. What was your biggest takeaway, kind of from Dan talking about the offensive line and just what they kind of have planned going forward?
So it was interesting to hear him talk about it, because it's kind of pointing to what we've been saying since we got the news that Frank was retiring. And I think it points to a couple things. So essentially what Dan said was, here we go. So experience is big. It is, said Campbell of the new look offensive line. But I think it's whether it's there or it's the guy next to you that can help you a lot too. You're going to need some experience somewhere in there. As long as you have that, you're okay. So like that makes me think maybe they're thinking about just throwing Ratledge in at center. And if you do have Glasgow in at right guard, that's still
Mm-hmm.
experience, because he can still help with pre-snap calls. He can help Ratledge IDing, like switching things, sliding protection, you name it. So I think that points to them at least considering that. But then I'm like, I wonder if they'll, go with the Frank Ragnow approach like they did. Let Frank, let Ratledge play right guard, let Graham play center, and then maybe Ratledge is the full-time center in 2020 and beyond. So I think that was Campbell basically saying you don't have to have, like, it doesn't have to be at center. Like like they can have
Yeah.
experience with Graham at either spot, right?
Yeah, and I think that's one thing that I'm probably taking a pretty large leap, because we're talking about this at the beginning of June. There's a lot of things that can happen, obviously, once camp happens and once pads get put on. But one of the biggest takeaways that I had from that quote was like it almost feels like Graham is a shoe-in to start somewhere on this offensive line, right? Whether it's at center or right guard or left guard, like they want to have that level of experience to be able to help out the rest of this offensive line, because it sounds also like if Graham is starting, whether it's at center or right guard or whatever, you're probably looking at two young guys starting alongside him, right? Whether it's a Tate Ratledge, obviously possibly at right guard or at center. You talk about Christian Mahogany, that only started a handful of games last year, so that's also a possibility. You also talk about, again, we've been fairly high on Miles Frazier about the possibility of maybe him pushing for a starting spot. Like there's the potential that you have a good amount of youth when you talk about either 1 to 0 years of experience on this offensive line. you're going to want somebody else outside of your tackles to be able to communicate to those guys and keep them on the same page.
Yeah, somebody on the interior that's close to Goff that can get calls when it's noisy and it's a money down. You know, you got to change protection. You know, so there's not a free runner. There's so much that happens pre-snap that I think a lot of people aren't privy to, or don't necessarily think about. And like we talked about a bunch, that Frank was among the best in the business at that, man. And just it's more on Goff's plate. Ratledge obviously played his football at Georgia, like got one of the best football educations, if you will, that you can get right now. And Graham's played a lot of football, man. I really do hope that a lot of us are doubting Graham, because I do think he's playing pretty banged up last year. We know he's a tough what. So I'm hoping he's healthy and can give us show like, hey man, like 2023 wasn't a fluke. Like he was playing really good football in 2023. Like I don't subscribe to PFF like as the Bible, but man,
Yeah.
like in 2020 he was like a top 10 guard per PFF, and the tape checked out. Like he was moving people, really really solid in pass pro. So I hope we can get back to there, because I think if we do, like you said, Miko, he offers the experience and he can still play. Plug Mahogany in at left guard, do what you will with Ratledge and Glasgow, and away we go. Let's go, man. Let's beat some people up.
I'm right there with you. And I think with Dan saying another one of Dan's mantras, which I think he talked more so about when you talk about the defense in this most recent press conference he had, but he's always said this at every season where like the best guys are going to play. And I think when it comes to Graham, I want them to play him where he's going to be his best self, right? There's been some speculation that like maybe he's better at right guard, because to your point, that season that he had where he was a top 10 guard, he was at right guard. Then they flipped him over to left. Do you put him at right? And if Dan is saying like, hey, as long as the experience is somewhere within that group, you can feel confident like, hey, we can put Tate at center, and then between Miles Frazier and Christian Mahogany, like one of those can battle it out between left guard and see like kind of how that shakes up.
Yeah, I love it, man. He even mentioned Kingsley Igwekukan. Igwakin. I want to say it's Igwakin the way Eric said it. So we're gonna get that down. I promise, Kingsley. If you somehow hear this for whatever reason, or your family, we're gonna get it right. We apologize, but I give him credit though, man. They were doing it was the last practice, obviously before camp later in July, and he's fast. He's definitely the most nimble offensive lineman right now. They were doing the drill where they throw it to him. Panay wasn't there, obviously. No Panay, no Glasgow, no Decker, but Kingsley can.
And I think that's something that Dan has talked about before. Like they want athleticism on the interior of that offensive line as well. So like I said, it's going to be interesting. We're at the beginning of June. Training camp hasn't even kicked off yet. But once training camp does kick off, and once we start to see pads get on, like I think that's going to be the deciding factor of like, okay, how do you handle these responsibilities when the Bullets are a little more live, right? Like if you're Tate Ratledge, you've been learning center, all summer. What does it look like when you actually have to line up opposite of DJ Reader, who's one of the best nose tackles in football? What happens when you have to, I can just imagine that they're going to slide Hutch over to 3-tech one of those times and just be like, hey, what do you do when this happens? And see how he handles those types of things. Because if you're a young, first time center, I can imagine a lot of teams are going to be like, hey, let's put our best 3-tech or our best pass rusher over that dude, and let's see if he can handle him, for 4 quarters.
Oh yeah, they're going to test you, because they're always, if you're a defensive coordinator, you're always probing for a weakness, man. Like, is there a guy I can pick on in here? Is there a guy that we can isolate, get in a one-on-one and allow somebody to whip and pass pro? So yeah, I think it'll be one of those two combinations. I feel like Mahogany is going to be at left guard. Maybe Miles Frazier, he can push. I hope he's good depth. I hope so is Kingsley. They had Manu in at left tackle. Coyote was in at right guard. Skipper in at right tackle. So it was good work, and like there wasn't a lot of full speed stuff going on, but you're getting put in situations, and that was kind of the gist of it, right?
Yeah. And speaking of being put in situations, something else that you outlined in your article, Jack Campbell's being put in a number of situations, obviously with the defense going through its own set of changes, with Kelvin Shepherd now taking the lead, and with them not having Alex Anzalone there, like Jack is at least in your own words, like Jack is starting to look more and more like an established Mike linebacker. And with him, having to handle that additional responsibility, right?
Yeah, he looked comfy, man. It was all like, you call it half speed. They were just really trying to fit things up, see if you know where to be when, that was really it. That's the definition of a walkthrough when you're doing it the way the Lions were with the last OTA. But it was cool because the offense was incorporating tempo here and there. Like they'd get to the line of scrimmage really quickly, and it was force Jack to make whatever changes quickly and get everybody lined up in time so they're not scrambling before the ball snapped. And he did a good job of it. He looked comfortable out there, looked like he was in command of the defense. And I'm sure it helps that he has spent the first 2 years of his career in Kelvin Shepard, who is now the defensive coordinator's room, back in that linebacker's room. So I'm excited to see Jack's development moving forward because he's got it all, man, to be like a really impactful 3-down linebacker at the center of this defense.
Yeah, I love to hear that because I think that's something that I've been looking forward to Jack to have. And I think while there's been some speculation about Alex Anzalone and why he's not at OTAs, which again isn't a huge surprise, right? He's a veteran player. He doesn't necessarily have to be there for these workouts or these practices. Seeing Jack being able to take more of that leadership role is exactly what you want, because that is the future of your linebacking room. When you look at him and Derek Barnes, those are the guys that at least looks like the Lions are going to be pushing forward as the guys to help lead this defense. And I think with Kelvin Shepard now being the guy as the defensive coordinator, it's going to be interesting to see how that responsibility shifts. We know when Aaron Glenn was, the DC, he put a lot of responsibility on his secondary players. He put a lot of responsibility on his safeties. Do we see that shift a little bit? I don't think we're going to see it shift a ton, right? Because I think when you have, smart, heady players like Kirby Joseph and Brian Branch, like you still want them to feel like they can make calls and things like that. But if you have someone like Jack that's been touted as like a true Mike linebacker, a true leader since the day he was drafted, if he's starting to really bloom like that going into his third season, maybe there's even more to be excited about when it comes down to this defense.
Yeah, and it's all about communication, especially between those guys, like up the spine of the defense. And if you have like three players who are really coming into their own, and Kirby, BB, and Jack, like up the spine of your defense at like the Mike and the two safeties, that's huge, man. But just because they're communicating, they're intelligent, and they're all really good football players that are, can make some plays. So another reason to be excited, Lions fans, if we didn't need another reason. But yeah, that was something that caught my eye. Like I said, wasn't much to practice. Ended up being like really lax walkthrough, just an opportunity to get them together before they broke for the summer, really, because they're not going to be back now until July 20th to prep for that game in Canton, Ohio. So, yeah, towards the end, we were just kind of chopping it up. I was talking to some of the other beat writers and just kind of watching things as there was a big stretching portion. They went through a little bit of individual, and yeah.
Nice. I think like you also mentioned to me, like we also got a couple sightings, right? Tyleik Williams actually was out on the field a little bit. So again, for Lions fans that were maybe a little concerned about like, where is he in terms of like his progression? He's at least getting on the field a little bit in OTAs, which should be a good sign for training camp, which, like we said, will be in a few weeks here once they kind of get ready for that Hall of Fame game. We all, like we said, we talked, you guys at least got to talk to Amon-Ra St. Brown, which is also another good thing because a lot of people have been speculating about his health, where he's at, and we kind of got a little bit more clarity on that situation, as well as seeing Isaac Teslaw as well out there, both of them kind of working with the trainers.
Yeah, so I guess Saint told us that he just had a little cleanup procedure on his knee, something that they do just over the years. So he's fine. He was working off to him and when we walked in, him and Teslaw were throwing off to the side. Then they kind of went off and did their own things, to get back on the field. But it was, I'm sure if they had to have gone, they probably would have. But like Dan Campbell said, they've been really conservative because it's May. Or it was June at the time of this practice. So no reason to push things. And there was like we talked about, no Glasgow, no Decker, no Panay, and no Anzalone. And I didn't even bother looking at the attendance. Like when I saw like a couple of them, I was like, yeah, I'm not even, because a lot of people will go through and try to do attendance. Yeah. I'm like, yeah, we're good. I know at least several are missing. I'm not going to try to go through all 90 here. So, yeah.
No, man, I think it was awesome, though. I think, I think this is a really great conversation. Hopefully, you guys, as the viewers, got a little bit more insight into what happened last week at OTAs. And if you still have a couple questions or you want to know some other things that happened, I highly suggest you guys go check out Morgan's article. I'll make sure it's linked in the description. But at least if you didn't get a chance to read it when it first dropped, go out, check that out, support our guy here. And yeah, I think, like you said, this is some really good things to come out. I think about the offense. I think there's some good things that are happening over on the defense that we should all be excited for as we make that march towards training camp. But that's pretty much going to do it for us. Let us know what you guys are thinking. What is some of the things that you're curious about as we head into training camp? Is there any position group that you still have question marks on? What do you think the Lions should do with the offensive line? And what do you feel about the Lions choosing to isolate more of their top tier players? Do you think that's a good idea? Do you think that they, is there a player that you think should be getting more shine coming into the season that didn't or hasn't as of right now? Also, if you're looking for any more additional Lions content, you can always check out prideofdetroit.com. There are new articles over there each and every day, multiple times throughout the day. And if you want to stay locked into any of the video content over here on YouTube, all you got to do is hit that subscribe button, hit the notification bell. Both of those things help out the channel immensely, but it also makes it that much easier for you guys to find our content. That way you don't have to go searching. You don't have to try and figure out what was the last video you watched. Like, it's so much easier, right? So definitely make sure to drop us a sub. We would greatly appreciate it. But with all that said, I'm Miko. He's Morgan. Thank you guys for taking the time to watch, and we'll catch you guys in the next one.